Welcome all our listeners to The Great Sources Season 2, Episode 23. Today's episode is called What Makes Eretz Yisrael Special, Part 2, Knowing Hashem. So we're continuing in this conversation, in this limud, of what's so special about Eretz Yisrael. As we've been discussing, the obligation incumbent upon us to live in Eretz Yisrael depends on our understanding of what Eretz Yisrael is all about. Because if we're going to point to the centrality of Eretz Yisrael in the Torah and say, look, clearly Eretz Yisrael is so important, we have to understand what makes it so important. Perhaps we have to have a certain attitude in order to learn from the Torah, in order to get what Eretz Yisrael is supposed to give us. And that I believe that is indeed the case. We have to understand what role Eretz Yisrael should play and how, in order for us to be able to access the great bracha, the great gift that inheres in Eretz Yisrael, and bring it back to our original question, in order for it to be an obligation for us to go there. So we spoke about last week, part 1 of this series, or this sub-series, let's call it, about what makes Eretz Yisrael special. We spoke about Ar'eka, Lech Lecha El Ha'aretz Asher Ar'eka, to the land that I, Hashem, will show you. And what we discussed was that in Eretz Yisrael, one is able and supposed to see things as Hashem does. Which means to see things in terms of the absolute Tov and Ra. What does Hashem see when he looks at the world? What interests him? What are his concerns? What jumps out at him? The answer is he sees Tov or Ra. Tov is that which meets the godly plan. Ra is that which deviates from it. So to see with the eyes of Hashem means to look at everything and think about, is this Tov or is this Ra, in the cosmic scheme, in the eternal and cosmic scheme of reality. To walk through life and to constantly be thinking in those terms. Is this Tov or is this Ra? For that to be what is your concern, for that to be how you process things, how you digest everything that you see and everything that you experience, that's what it means to see things with the eyes of Hashem. And that's what Ar'eka means. Hashem is telling Avram, I want to include you in my form of vision. And if you do this, if you walk around and you constantly are judging for good and evil in the most absolute sense, meaning, when I say absolute sense, I mean we always think about good and evil, but we usually think about what's good and evil for us. But if you think about what's good and evil in the absolute, which is another way of saying what's good and evil in the eyes of Hashem, then and only then are you seeing things with a divine eye, as it were. And this is something you could do. You can walk around and practice this, try to think about these things, and we'll get to that soon. Actually, should I do this in Chutz La'aretz? Do I have to wait for Eretz Yisrael to do this? We'll talk about that a little bit today. And what we spoke about was that in order for a person to successfully habituate himself to this kind of vision, to this kind of seeing, in order for a person to be able to indeed go through life and see things in terms of good and evil, in terms of absolute good and evil, is only possible if there's a response from heaven, a response from Shemayim to people engaging in good and evil. Meaning, if what we consider to be good and evil, our personal success and happiness, is linked with the cosmic good and evil, which means to say, if by doing good we get good, personal good, and by doing evil in the cosmic eternal sense, or what we call doing evil in the eyes of God, if that causes evil to befall us, then those conditions would allow for a person to actually navigate life and always think about God's good and evil. Because think about this. Because let's say there wouldn't be a link, and that link, by the way, is called, as we mentioned last week, that link is called schar v'einish, where the human interests and the divine interests, let's call it, actually affect each other, have this interplay called schar v'einish. And if there's no such connection between human affairs and divine affairs, then our hypothetical tzaddik who's walking around calling balls and strikes and says this is toiv and this is ra, if there's no response from heaven, meaning what we mean to say is if people can do evil in the eyes of God and still get everything that's good in the eyes of man, then this guy is walking around saying toiv ra, he's just a meshugana because he's calling this toiv ra thing and there's absolutely no sense of it. There's absolutely no experience of that in this world. So what's going to happen is it's not going to last. He's not going to be able to experience the world in terms of toiv ra if there isn't some response, some relevance to this categories. Meaning he's going to say something is toiv, something is ra. If that's not relevant in day to day, and if no one experiences that in the human affairs level, then he's not going to be able to maintain this attitude that the ultimate truth and the ultimate reality is painted in terms of toiv ra bein elikim. And therefore in Eretz Yisrael, which is the land of V'hayim Shomei Tishmo Mitzvosai, there will be rain, and if not, not. That is therefore the land of Einei Tamid Einei Hashem Elokecha Bo Mereshis Hashana V'Adach Shana. Hashem is always looking at that land, and therefore, meaning in that land, Hashem is always taking an interest in the actual affairs on the Aretz. And whether they're toiv ra, Hashem always looks for toiv ra, but on Eretz Yisrael, he looks to see if there's toiv ra because he's going to respond in the Aretz. It's the Aretz Asher Einei Hashem Elokecha Bo. He actually cares about what should happen in that Aretz, and he will decide what happens in the Aretz based on whether it's toiv ra be'einov, and it's in that land where Avram could learn also to see, with the human eyes, to see things as Hashem sees with his own einayim. So that's what Avram did b'shaitai, and that's what we're supposed to continue as his descendants in that land where he began it. Now, here we're going to take this to another angle, let's call it. This idea of seeing things with the eyes of Hashem. What happens if you have a tzaddik that approaches the world with this paradigm? A tzaddik who cares about, teaches himself to care about and to think about constantly. Toiv ra be'einei Hashem. It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing. You can walk around caring not about yourself, thinking not about yourself, thinking about something much greater than yourself, thinking about the greatest thing, the most absolute and eternal and universal things. And you can care about those, and that could be your interest and what's relevant to you and experience. Makes you into a very great person. So what happens when you have a great person like that, a tzaddik like that? So as we've been discussing till now, so there can be a response from Hashem in certain circumstances, certain lands, where Hashem actually engages in the same toiv ra classification in terms of deciding what should be in that land. But what happens is something more than that. When there's a tzaddik who's interested in the divine toiv ra, or we can call that the cosmic toiv ra, when there's a tzaddik that's interested in that kind of toiv ra, then what happens is Hashem responds, meaning Hashem will act through reality. Reality will match what the tzaddik thinks is correct. So in other words, till now we were talking about the fact that there are some places in this world, Eretz Yisrael, where divine toiv ra and human toiv ra influence each other, or are matched up, aligned. Then we have this tzaddik who looks for it, right? He looks to see that alignment, and he cares about that. He cares about divine toiv and divine ra. And now we need the divine response to be aligned to what humans care about, right? Because as we were saying before, if your perception of Tov Ra has no relevance, Lamaisa, then it's not going to last. Okay? So what happens is, Hashem starts judging this land where the tzaddik is calling Tov Ra, based on whether they are Tov or Ra. And what he does is he judges them based on what the tzaddik considers to be right. And so I'll explain to you exactly why that's the case, but I'm going to illustrate this, show you where we see this. We see this exactly in the story of Saddam. Because in the story of Saddam, as we have, if you're looking at the sources, I'll bring the psukim over there, of course, Hashem says that I am going to reveal to Avraham my plan to destroy Saddam, right? And Avraham approaches Hashem and says, it's not fair. What if there's 50 tzaddikim? What if there's 45? What if there's 40? And what's happening in that whole story, and if you want to learn more about this, you can look at my sefer, Eretz Yisrael, the piece called Vayigash Avram, which is the first essay in the Eretz Yisrael. What happens in that story is that Hashem adjusts the divine standard, the divine scale of Mishpat and Tzedakah to human perception. Hashem accepts this deal, as it were, this relationship that he has with Avram, which necessitates that Avram should understand Hashem, and Hashem shouldn't do something that is unjust in the eyes of Avram. And why does that happen? Why does Hashem care what's just in the eyes of Avram? Because if the tzaddik is the one who's going to call out Tov and Ra on earth and say, this is Tov, this is Ra. And in order for someone to have the ability to live in Eretz Yisrael, to have our Eka, that's what the essence of Avram's mission is, to be able to see with Hashem's eyes. In order for that to happen, there has to be a response from heaven, so to speak, right? When he sees Ra on the cosmic level, there has to be Ra on the human level. When he has to be able to see the people who are doing good, receive good, and doing evil, get their just deserts. He has to see that, and he has to understand it. It has to be something that makes sense according to his understanding of what is right. And when we say what is right, that means what is Mishpat and Tzedakah. Those are various words for figuring out what's right. So that whole negotiation by the Saddam story between Avram and Hashem is in fact the tzaddik and Hashem working out the meeting point of how they're going to relate to each other. The tzaddik has to see Mishpat and Tzedakah on earth because that's what enables him to be areka, to see things with Hashem's eyes. If everything would fly against what the tzaddik thinks is right, then he would have no hope but to do like everyone else does, throw up his hands in despair and say, I have no idea what's going on. But he has a mission. His mission is areka. His mission is to see things from Hashem's perspective. So if he see things from Hashem's perspective, he's nichnas beside Hashem. He becomes part of Hashem's heavenly court, as it were, and he becomes part of the conversation with Hashem. And part of the conversation means that Hashem can't just do something that he thinks is wrong, because then he won't understand it. If he doesn't understand it, where's the areka? How is he supposed to walk around seeing the earth as Hashem does if things don't happen on earth as he the tzaddik believes is right? So that's what's happening in Saddam. And there's a few midrashim that make this point. That, and this is in the source sheets, that where it says Amechas ani me Avraham, Hashem said, I can't hide from Avram what I'm going to do. So there are two midrashim, and I want to put them together and bring out a very interesting point. One midrash says, I gave Avram Eretz Yisrael, so I have to tell him my plans for Saddam. A simple level, you think that means, okay, I gave him the gift, I have to ask him a shus before I destroy Saddam. But what it actually means is that the gift of the Aretz to the tzaddik is predicated on this areka. So that if you give the tzaddik the Eretz and you ask him to start looking at it and to see it the way Hashem does, then you're basically asking him to be the one whose mind should meet the divine mind and thereby determine how Hashem should relate to the Eretz. Because Hashem gave Avram the gift of the Eretz, he had to tell him about Saddam, because Saddam is part of Eretz Yisrael, and it's part of the Avram's land, where Avram is the one who determines how the divine is going to interact. Okay, I hope this is clear. It's really, again, simple. I want things to be very simple, because they are really simple. Hashem wants the tzaddik to see things from his eyes. That's only possible in a place where the tzaddik's judgment of what's Torah is going to have echo in what actually happens to the people. And what kind of response does it have to have? The response that the tzaddik believes is deserving. So that the areka, so that he should continue doing areka, should continue being able to see things the way Hashem does. Meaning, by the standard of the eternal Torah. Now there's another medrash that says that the reason why, that when Hashem said, ani me Avram, I have to tell Avram what I'm doing, the medrash says, Hashem said, I gave Avram the whole world. Nasan ha'elikim la'Avraham ha'olam. He gave him the world. Shenemar Hashem amar chasani me Avram. What that means is, by asking Avram to sign off, let's call it, right? To sign off on God's actions. So he's essentially saying Avram is the master of the world, right? He makes the decisions. Now, which did he give him? Did he give him the Eretz, or did he give him the whole world? And the answer is something very interesting. The answer is that the whole world will one day get Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. The Minchas Chinuch in Mitzvah Tov Kuf Chaf speaks this out explicitly. He says that in a halachic way, it's halacha, obviously, Kedusha, it's always halacha. He says, well, Mashiach is going to capture the whole world. And there's halacha of Kol Makom Asher Tidach Kaf Ragelchem, any place that Bnei Yisrael capture, at least after they have the whole Eretz Yisrael, otherwise it might be Kibbutz Yachid, then it gets Kedusha Eretz Yisrael. And the Minchas Chinuch actually quotes a Gemara, which we don't have. I mean, there's no such Gemara. It's very strange. He quotes a Gemara, says, Asida Eretz Yisrael shetespashit b'chol ha'olam. Eretz Yisrael is going to spread across the whole world. The Malbim in the Sefer Eretz Chemda on the Haftarah of Bamidbar also quotes a medrash to that effect. Asida Eretz Yisrael shetespashit b'chol ha'olam. Minchas Chinuch says it's a Gemara, but it's not a Gemara. But he says, Minchas Chinuch explains that Mashiach is going to capture all the lands, and they're all going to get Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. There are a few midrashim that make this point, not as clearly as the Minchas Chinuch quotes this Gemara, but there's a medrash Yalkut Shemaini that says, Asidu Yerushalayim liyos ke'Eretz Yisrael ve'Eretz Yisrael kechol ha'olam kula, which pashas means Yerushalayim is going to, the whole present day Eretz Yisrael is going to have Kedushas Yerushalayim, and the whole present day Olam Kula, the whole world, is going to have Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. And there's another Yalkut Shemaini that says that we used to be like a daughter. A daughter gets a tenth of her father's estate. The Gemara in Ksubis talks about that. And we got 7 umis out of 70. Lasad Laver, we're going to be like a Zachar, and we're going to get the whole estate of Hashem, meaning all the nations. So the whole world is going to become Eretz Yisrael. There's also a quote in the source sheet from the V'yarah Moshe to that effect, that Galus is preparing the whole world for the state of purity. And by us being in Galus and doing mitzvahs and bringing Torah to the whole world, we are purifying the Avir of Eretz Amim, leading to this state where the whole world is Eretz Yisrael. So what does this mean? So remember, what am I explaining? That we have these midrashim. One medrash says that Hashem gave Avram the Eretz. Another medrash says, I gave Avram the whole world, and therefore we have to ask, Avram could control what happens in Saddam. Well, really he only gave him Eretz Yisrael. Why does the medrash say he gave him the whole world? So I said, because eventually the whole world's going to become Eretz Yisrael. So what? Now it's not. So I want to explain to you what that means. The whole idea of Hashem giving an Eretz to man, the whole idea of that is that a tzaddik could represent Hashem on the earth. That a tzaddik could be kivea through this whole approach of our eka, of seeing things from Hashem's perspective, and insisting on saying this is toiv and this is ra, this should be and this shouldn't be. And that being his whole motivating approach, his everything he thinks about and everything he concerns himself with in life is Hashem's toiv and ra. That's what our eka is about, okay? It's this invitation for a man to be as great as Hashem, as it were, in this way. To look at things and to be Hashem's representative, to see what should be and what shouldn't be. Amazing thing. Man should decide that. That's our eka. Now that has nothing to do with a certain piece of land. But etzem. That is this idea that Hashem trusts man, or he found a man who's worthy of teaching, of showing the world how to see things in this godly way. Eretz Yisrael is where it started. Eretz Yisrael is the first place that Avram enacted this kind of behavior, put this into effect. And as we said, it's connected to V'chayim Shemaya, connected to the fact that there could be a hunger in Eretz Yisrael. But in principle, once there's this possibility for our eka, once there's a possibility for humans to see in the eyes of Hashem, in principle, that's going to eventually spread to the whole world. So the idea that Hashem says to Avram, Lech Lecho, I'm giving an Eretz, is not about a certain part of land. Really, the core idea is Hashem is saying, there is such a thing, there is a possibility of someone seeing things in the Einei Hashem, and thereby, let's call it, bringing down heaven onto earth by being Hashem's representative, and populating the earth with people who look with Hashem's eyes. Amazing. That's the idea. How do you do that? By Hirav Ba'aretz, very specific circumstances that got Avram started. But that's not the point. It's very important to think about this. We tend to think of Eretz Yisrael as, oh, there's a piece of the planet that's holy. Which is true. But the idea of Eretz Yisrael is that land can be holy. Earth can be holy. The realm of human affairs can be made holy. How? How does that happen? Well, we, Bnei Yisrael, Bnei Avram Yitzchak, have a very specific role in that. And our specific role is centered in Eretz Yisrael and will eventually spread to the whole world. Okay. So this brings us to another point. So far we spoke about seeing with the eyes of Hashem, and specifically that if we see with the eyes of Hashem, then Chesed and Mishpat and Tzedakah, we spoke about most, Mishpat and Tzedakah will then be tailor-made to the Tzaddik's expectations. And this brings us to the idea that the title of this year, Knowing Hashem, this brings us to another idea about what Eretz Yisrael is all about. Why did Avram Avinu get to find out what's going on with Saddam? So the pasuk says, because he is going to be Vishamu Derech Hashem. Hashem says Avram is the one who's going to guard the way of Hashem. Lasit Tzedakah Mishpat. He's the one who's going to do Tzedakah Mishpat. So he's the one who is going to enact these divine midas and put them into practice in the world. So there's this idea that in Eretz Yisrael, in the Holy Land, what we're doing is we are putting the midas alokias of Chesed, Mishpat, Tzedakah, we're putting them into effect in a way that we are able to emulate them. That man can learn from them. Because that's what we've been talking about till now, that tzaddik sees things in the eyes of Hashem, so Hashem is going to make the response on earth something that the tzaddik can understand. Then what happens, right? Imagine you go through life and everything happens. Imagine you're the tzaddik who's always calling Tov Rabbeinu Hashem, okay? And then what happens is, there's a response to that. Whatever is ra, the person suffers. Whatever is tov, the person does good. And not only that, but the person gets toiv according to what you, the tzaddik, thinks is right, and the person gets ra according to what you, the tzaddik, thinks is right. So what happens is you have a model, you have a living, breathing model of derech Hashem, of tzedakah mishpat. You see Hashem's tzedakah mishpat b'payil. There's no greater inspiration for your derech of tzedakah mishpat. And you're going to make sure to, as Avram did, continue and teach it to your children. Okay? So the Eretz is the place for chesed, mishpat, tzedakah to be manifest. And chesed, mishpat, tzedakah, when we take Hashem's midas of chesed, mishpat, tzedakah, and we live by those midas, that's called das Hashem. That's called das Hashem. That's called das Hashem. We'll jump ahead for a moment to here in the source sheet to number 13, where it defines, the pasuk in Yirmiyah defines, what is das Hashem? To defend the poor. Don din ani ve'evin oz toiv haloi hi hadas oisi. What is to know me? What does it mean to know Hashem? It means, it was talking about a king over there who should not have abused the poor, shouldn't have taken advantage of them, he should have defended them. Knowing Hashem means knowing, understanding what Hashem is doing in His universe. And what Hashem is doing is chesed, mishpat, tzedakah. As the other pasuk in Yirmiyah says, Haskel v'yadaya oisi, this is in Yirmiyah Perek Tes, pasuk of Gimel, Haskel v'yadaya oisi ki ani Hashem oise chesed, mishpat, tzedakah, ba'aretz. To know Hashem is to understand Hashem's actions, which are chesed, mishpat, tzedakah. Means everything Hashem is doing is right. Why is it right? Because it's underpinning of chesed, mishpat, tzedakah. If you do yourself, if you do chesed, mishpat, tzedakah, that's because you feel it. You know it's out there in the whole of reality. That's das Hashem. And if you could look at reality and say, this is chesed, this is mishpat, this is tzedakah, and you could do this. You could literally do this, and you should do this. You should walk around thinking, where's the chesed? Where's the mishpat? Where's the tzedakah? What's this? What's that? And I don't mean to say only stories about people. Think about nature. Think about laws of nature. And you could see what the chesed is, what the mishpat is, what the tzedakah is. And when you do that, that's das Hashem. That's das Hashem. And das Hashem has a very close connection to the Eretz. Again, let's put this all together, because in Eretz Yisrael is the place where you could see things in the eyes of Hashem. See things in the eyes of Hashem means tzaddik is going to look for Tov Rabbeinu Hashem. If he's going to look for Tov Rabbeinu Hashem, what Hashem is going to do is he's going to make human affairs depend on what's Tov Rabbeinu Hashem, and depend on, in what way? In the tzaddik's definition of mishpat tzedakah, chesed, mishpat tzedakah, because the tzaddik is the one who's looking. He's the one who's, Hashem wants to see something. That's what Hashem wants. That is what Hashem wanted from Avram. You understand? It's not even like, oh, Hashem wanted Avram to do whatever, and he said, Mamela, I'll give you a so. He wanted Areka. That's what we know. Right? So you look at the Torah. What does Hashem want from Avram? He wants him to see things the way Hashem does. And this gets to the question of Tachlis Abriya and Yehi Or as being the greatest Tov. We're not going to go into that. But the point is that this is not like a means. It's not a means. Hashem wants people to see things as He does. And what will Hashem do for people to see things as He does? Here's what He's going to do. He's going to make their experiences, the person who actually takes the challenge and says, okay, you know what, I'm going to start looking. I want to start looking. And I'm telling you, if you do this, you'll see. If a person says, I'm going to take this challenge and I'm going to start teaching myself to see things as Hashem does. And it's constant. You have to constantly think about it because it's not natural. It's not natural. You have to think. How does Hashem see this? How would Hashem see this? What is Hashem looking at? What does Hashem care about? When He looks, when He's on this scene, you go out somewhere and you could be in somewhere, you could be anywhere, and you start thinking to yourself, what does Hashem see? What is Hashem looking at? What does He care about? Teach you. It will make you into a greater person. You start thinking about more important things than your small life. And then Hashem says, okay, that's what Hashem wants. Hashem wants us to see things as He does. So He's going to adjust what happens so that what happens is consistent with those kinds of categories of Tov Rabbeinu Hashem. And it's going to be consistent in the way that the tzaddik knows. which means the tzaddik is going to see Hashem's midas. B'poil, it's a loop. He'll see Hashem's midas b'poil. It becomes easier for him to see Tov Rabbeinu Hashem. So that's why we have that Das Hashem is very much connected with Eretz Yisrael. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you some basic sources for this, but only in brief. If you want to learn more about this, and you should, then I refer you to the essay called Das Hashem in my Sefer Eretz Yaakov. That's the last Maimer. The last drush in Eretz Yaakov is called Das Hashem. And there I show that Das Hashem, and we know what Das Hashem means. Das Hashem means this kind of familiarity with Hashem. Seeing Hashem's midas. Das Hashem is something that's specifically connected with Eretz Yisrael. When there's an offer from Hashem to know Him, there's the mention of Eretz Yisrael. And this, if you look at number 8, 9, 10, and 11 in the source sheet, you'll see this. Hashem said to Avram, Ani Hashem, and Avram said, Bama Eda, which means that there was a conversation over there about Das, but ain't Kad Mekaimai. And there Hashem said, I'm going to give you the land. Hashem said to Yaakov, Ani Hashem, I'm going to give you the land. And Yaakov says, Lo Yodati. Again, something about knowing Hashem. And in Va'era, when Hashem said to Moshe, Ani Hashem, and now it's time to know me, Shmi Hashem Lo Yodati, tell them Ani Hashem, they're going to know me, and I'm going to give them the Aretz. Avesi Eschem Ala Aretz. And the same thing in Yechezkel. Das Hashem is something that happens in the Aretz. Ani Hashem Oisei Chesed Mishpat U'Tzedakah Ba'aretz. Haska v'yodoya Oisei ki Ani Hashem Oisei Chesed Mishpat U'Tzedakah Ba'aretz. And there's a pasuk in Isaiah that talks about the lack of Das Elikim Ba'aretz. But specifically, it's connected with the Aretz that Hashem gives to us, and this is why. Hashem giving us an Aretz. Remember, we don't care about geography, we don't care about politics, we don't care about military conquest. Well, what do we care about? What does Hashem? What does the Torah care about? I mean, of course we care about that. What does the Torah care about? The Torah is not about that. The Torah's gift of the Aretz to Avram is this opportunity for Areka. Opportunity for man to see things as Hashem does. And then for Hashem to respond and make things happen in a way that is consistent with the tzaddik's understanding of Torah, which will lead the tzaddik to Das Hashem, understanding Hashem, and getting even closer to knowing what Hashem's paradigm is, and getting a stronger Areka. That's the gift of the Aretz. That, and only that. And when we could establish that kind of society, if you can establish that kind of community, that kind of people, that is, everyone thinks about Tov Rabbeinu Hashem. And again, please think about it. Don't think you know what it is. It's not something that, it's not just about mitzvahs. It's about something more basic in a way. I mean, you have to think about the categories of Tov Ra in themselves, not just about halacha. What's Tov? What's Ra? It's about basic judgments. So, if you have a society, it starts with the tzaddik, starts with the individual, Avram. But then that's supposed to continue and become a whole nation, a whole society that's living with this. And Hashem is responding to them. And Hashem cares about their opinion. So therefore things happen in this Aretz. It's just amazing. You should just think about this. Forget about doing it for a moment. Just imagine this. It's a wonderful thing to fantasize about. Even just as a fantasy. Even if it wouldn't be real. And we believe it is because it's in the Torah. But even as a make-believe, it's such a wonderful idea. You have someone who says, I'm going to see things as God does. And God says, okay, fine. Here's where we can do it, because in this land, godly things actually have relevance. If they do what's good in the eyes of God, good things happen to them. And then if you see things the way God does, God is going to let you call the shots of how He should respond. And that's going to only make you see God even more, because you're actually experiencing his Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah. That, in a nutshell, is Das Hashem, Ba'aretz, in Eretz Yisrael. So where do we do this? We do this in Eretz Yisrael, right? Why? Why do we do it in Eretz Yisrael? Well, so one thing, as we said, because that's where Avraham Avinu did it, because that's where there's V'hayim Shemaya. And we're not starting new. We can't start new. We're not Avraham Avinu. Hashem's not going to do this for us as individuals. We can only do this as a nation that continues the story of Avraham Avinu and the whole history of Avraham Avinu. So you have to understand, it's very important. The fact that the history of us, our history is in Eretz Yisrael, it's not just this emotional, sentimental thing of like, okay, I have this spiritual high when I'm in Eretz Yisrael because it's a land that the Nevi'im walked, which is also very special, of course. But it's much more than that. It's that this covenant between Hashem and humans. There was one individual who initiated it. The individual is Avraham Avinu. You could try to start again, try to make your own religion. It's not going to happen. What you can do it successfully is be mamshech the derech of Avraham Avinu. Continue his ways. And continuing his ways means being rooted in the history of your nation, caring about your land, caring about where you came from, caring about what happened before you. So all that is a factor in having a national identity of being continuing of Avraham. So that's our inspiration. We won't do this except for as a hemshech of Avraham Avinu. So we have to connect to the story of Avraham Avinu and to the land where Avraham Avinu did it. That is one aspect of this particular land of Canaan as being the place where we have to do that. And the other aspect is, as we mentioned earlier, this Das Hashem of Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah is something that happens in a community, in a nation. Meaning, in order to see Hashem's justice, right, we have to care about justice. In order to care about justice, there has to be a society, individuals who live on their own, not part of society, let's say, let's say someone's completely not part of society, then they have no interest in Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah. It's not their concern. The concerns of Hashem's good midas, let's call it, of Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah, are like that pasuk says, you have to defend the poor. When there's a society, you have to make it function in the best way. Eretz Yisrael is the place where we have the opportunity to be a nation. And again, not because that strip of land is the only place we could do it. It's impossible to do it elsewhere. Certainly it would be possible for us to be a nation elsewhere. But that is the land. That was our land. And we have a connection to. And that's where it can work. That's where it'll actually work for us to function as a nation. And therefore, that particular land, given that it was just politically given to us, and therefore it's our place where we can gather and mechazik each other, that's the place where we can have a nation that's Eiseh Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah Ba'aretz. So we're getting to another angle in Eretz Yisrael, which is it's the place to know Hashem. And to know Hashem, as we quoted that pasuk, know Hashem is not this abstract idea. To know Hashem means to emulate Him. And to do like Him, to do Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah like Him, to be inspired to not just know what He's all about, but to actually continue the goodness that Hashem does. So now we're taking the loop to the next step. See? Look at the land the way Hashem does. Hashem says, fine, do that. I'm going to make Schar v'Einish. The land, the people are going to get punished if they, if the tzaddik calls Ra, people will get punished. If the tzaddik calls Tov, people will get good. What kind of good, what kind of evil? Let the tzaddik decide what Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah Lucky should look like, or what scale not what it should look like, what scale it should be on, so that he knows Hashem. So that he then does what? Can build a society modeled on Hashem's actions. If you understand Hashem's Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah, then you could continue the goodness that Hashem did of creation, of all Hashem's work. It's Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah, and you could take it further. You could be engaged in nation building. Nation building. Do we want to build nations? Well, if we can do it the way Hashem did, built the world, which means if we understand what reality was all about, and we think we can continue in that same way, then we should. And that's what Eretz Yisrael allows for. So, just one pasuk there on the source sheet you have, just to bring out this point. Yirmiyahu Hanavi says that when the whole nation doesn't have Das Hashem, he says, I wish it could be in the desert. Galus is like anti-Das Hashem, is when there's no Das Hashem. And having Eretz Yisrael is Das Hashem, because Das Hashem is to have a great society, and that's what Eretz Yisrael is for. If we don't have Das Hashem, we don't need an Aretz, because the whole idea of Hashem giving us an Aretz is the possibility for man to know Hashem and to use that knowledge to further the perfection of the Aretz. You think there's any point in having a land if we're not going to sanctify it? There's 0 point. The gift of the land in the Torah is that man, go ahead. Let's see what you can do. Let's see if you can replicate divinity on earth. That's all the Torah cares about. And going back to the thing we started last week, the Gemara Ksuba says, if you live, and this is what we really want. This is what I want. I want Kol Hador Be'eretz Yisrael Shor B'Lei Oven. I want that. I want to first know how to get that. I want you to think about how to get that. And I want us all to get there. So think about this. Now we know why. Dor Be'eretz Yisrael Shor B'Lei Oven. Why? Amazing thing. Because you see things the way Hashem does. And all of a sudden, life starts revolving around that. Things happen that are consistent with that. Not just consistent with that, but in an understandable way. So of course, you live in a world like that. And again, I encourage you to just fantasize about this. Just that is enough, because that will inspire you. And then you'll start doing it. But the first thing is fantasize about it. It'd be nice to write a book about it, like just like a fantasy world. You live in such a world, you know what's going to happen? You know what we're going to care about? Only thing you're going to care about is what's absolute taiva and what's absolute evil. Because that's going to be the most core reality that underpins everything else, and everything else just revolves around that orbit, right? What's the nucleus of everything in that world is absolute good and absolute evil. So of course you're going to be shoy b'lei oven. Are you going to sin? Are you crazy? Are you nuts? You might as well just commit suicide and do a sin. You might as well just destroy the world. Like, what are you doing? If really the Tov Rabbeinu Hashem is the most absolute determinant for everything that happens, and there's a whole feedback mechanism where you see it and you experience it, and your opinion changes it, and when you open your mouth and you daven and you tell Hashem, I think this is what you should do, all of a sudden that's what happens. Are you going to sin? Of course not. And here's the thing I was alluding to before. It's a very important thing to think about. This is not about that strip of land called Eretz Canaan per se. These ideas are not inherently connected to Eretz Canaan. And in fact, not only are they not inherently connected to Eretz Canaan, but eventually the whole world is going to get these ideas. And as the Satmar Rebbe quotes, being in Chutz La'aretz purifies Avi Eretz Amin. He says, therefore, one shouldn't go back to Eretz Yisrael. I don't think that's correct, as we discussed. You certainly should go back to Eretz Yisrael. But, start that. Start this even in Golus. No reason to wait. The whole idea of Eretz Yisrael is that it's possible to sanctify land. It's possible to see the earth in terms of Hashem's Re'iyah of Tevirah. It's possible to sanctify the earth. It starts from Avram. And then we continue. And we're mechazik it because we're a continuation of Avram. And only in Eretz Yisrael can we truly continue in Avram's ways. And only in Eretz Yisrael can we truly be a nation and create societies based on Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah. But can we do this partially in Chutz La'aretz? Can a Yachid start doing this in New York or Chicago or Brazil or France? Yes. And he should. He really should. Start doing this. I hope you're in Eretz Yisrael, but if you're listening in your Chutz La'aretz, you start doing this. And here's what's going to happen. What's going to happen is you really want to go to Eretz Yisrael. Because once you start doing this, you start understanding how to see things in the eyes of Hashem and how the world could look. The possibility of having even a stronger Re'iyah Bein Hashem in a land of Ahayim Shemaya and a society that all continues the ways of Avram and is all inspired by the same idea will be the most exciting thing for you. You want to do it b'shleimus, but you should certainly start doing it in Chutz La'aretz, start practicing, and you'll get what's called the Bechina of Eretz Yisrael. You'll get it in Chutz La'aretz. No reason not to start it. So that's what we will discuss. We will leave it at that for now. So what we learned was that there's seeing in the eyes of Hashem. That's what we spoke about last week. We developed that further, and we also spoke about the Das Hashem that results from that, and the Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah Ba'aretz that comes in Eretz Yisrael, and is centered around seeing things by Hashem, and how that will make a person be shori,